Hi, I'm Alicia Michelle, best-selling author, ICF certified coach, and neurocoach. I love helping Christian women discover practical ways to manage emotions with science and scripture so they can live with more calm, more clarity, more confidence. I'm so glad you're here. Find a cozy spot and let's get started. Hi there. Welcome to today's episode of the Christian Mindset Coach with me, Alicia Michelle. If you are of a certain age, typically, you come to this stage of life where you may be asked to do caregiving that's not the caregiving you had been doing for maybe most of your life. If you'd been a parent, if you had been caring for young children and then they grew up and maybe now they've left the house, there is a stage that many of us walk through where we're having to take care of our parents, or maybe we are asked to take care of a spouse. It can be a very faith stretching time. Now, I have to say that I am right at the cusp of this personally. This is not something that I am walking through right now, but I can see it on the horizon. My dad is in his 80s, my mom is in her mid 70s, and I watched my parents walk my mom's parents through some of this. And so I know what is ahead potentially. And I also have many friends who are in this situation and who feel so much loneliness, guilt, frustration, anger, confusion. They just don't quite know what to do with all of this because they're maybe I'm still raising a young child, depending on the age of their parent. It's hard to know. They might be the youngest of 12 people and their parent is in their 80s, but they're only in their 30s or 40s and they're being asked to take care of. And they're in this sandwich sort of situation. Or maybe there's been a situation where there's been abuse and you're now in a place where you're having to care for this parent that you're like, oh my gosh. Or maybe it's a spouse who's suffering with dementia and you're thinking, I didn't marry this person. I married a different person. And it's so hard every day to have to get up and to keep serving and to keep loving. This episode is for you. If you're in that situation or you know someone who's in that situation, I pray you will share this episode with them because there just aren't enough people talking about this, especially in the church. And I think there is an added layer as a Christian of I have to serve and give and love. And I invited my friend, Linda Larson, on today. She is someone I know personally in my real world sort of situation, but she's also an expert in this area. She has not only served as a hospice nurse for many years, she has walked through this on her own. So I was talking to her about the situation, and she just recently wrote her first book on this topic. When I was telling her, I'm so glad you're writing this book because there are many of us who are needing advice and just a feeling of you're not alone in this. So I was really grateful that she said yes to coming on the show as she's going to be talking to us about what it's like to walk through this and the mental side that you and I might struggle with if we were to go through this journey, whether it's a parent or a spouse that we're helping through this aging process, some of the realities of what we will be feeling, what's normal, what can we do about it? I just pray that it gives you specific encouragement and direction where you're at if you're in this season. Let me tell you a little bit more about Linda. She is a hospice and home care nurse, and she's the author of Walk Me Home, the founder of Prepare to Care. She teaches and supports caregivers through writing, speaking, video training, and one-on-one coaching. So she is someone who has walked this journey herself, as she'll share about with her own dad going through the aging process, and she has walked hundreds and hundreds of people through it as well. So she's heard a lot of the things that if you're in the stage that you're going through, she's been there and she's walked through it. And so she's a great resource. Here is the conversation with Linda Larson. Hey, Linda, thanks so much for coming on today. As we were just talking before we got started, this is one of those topics that I feel like everyone around us is walking through and no one is really talking about how to deal with it. So thanks for being here today to talk through it with us.
Of course, it's my honor. I agree with you. So many people are going through caring for their aging loved ones or wondering when it's going to be their turn. Maybe they're
Yeah.
feeling some changes. And so there's all of us know somebody over 70. So whether we're in it now or we're going to be in it soon, it's going to affect us at some point for sure.
And as we said in the introduction, like our focus today is on those who are the caregiver, those who are the ones who are wanting to show up for their aging parents, but are it's not like we've been prepared for this. And so, what are some of these emotions that we experience that
Yeah.
as we get to this stage, what are we feeling? And how can we normalize that a little bit?
I've worked with hundreds of families who are going through this.
Mm,
And what I see most of all is a mix. And it's very confusing to our hearts to have that kind of mix. You can have within an hour such feelings of love and tenderness towards your loved one. And then the next minute, resentment and frustration. And then right on the heels of that, guilt, because you think, gosh, how can I be mad at him? He's dying. But I'm so mad because when it's your family member, oftentimes too, they can pull your chain emotionally like no one else. There's
yeah.
often baggage from past experiences, past hurts. And so all those emotions together and on top of each other, and it can leave you feeling I'm never enough, I'm not doing enough. We haven't even talked about grief because I
Yeah.
think that there's such a thing as pre-grief where you're starting to think I'm losing this person an inch at a time,
Yeah.
and the grief of that, losing that person and losing the role that you have in caring for them. That could be your purpose right now. So that's a grief of its own. So I see all of those emotions just stirred up in people who are caring for their loved ones.
Yeah. And on top of that, it's an interesting stage of life that we're typically in when we walk through this with an aging parent is maybe in most cases we have kids who are out of the house. Maybe we still have a few that are younger that are teens or in school. So a lot of us are working still. We have these other things pulling at us. And yet we feel this strong call to I have to go help my mom because she can't anymore. Or I have to take my dad to dialysis because he needs a ride. Just it's this tension of that too, I think. So, can you share what you're noticing about this stage two that makes it doubly hard?
Yeah, sometimes it happens very young. I have a
Yeah.
client whose mom had a stroke in her early 60s, and the daughter was quite young. She still had young kids at home.
Wow.
And so that pull and that tugging of my responsibility to my kids and my responsibility to my work and to my mom, who was constantly calling during meetings. And when she was helping out at the school, she would call about where did you put the broccoli that we made last night? Simple things, but it was a constant preoccupation for her because she was
Yeah.
always worried about her mom. And yeah, I think
Mm.
that whole sandwich generation thing is real. And even if you don't have kids at home, you have a life. You know,
Yeah.
there are
Right.
things that you are foregoing because you're caring for your loved one. You're not able to just go out and have lunch with a friend without thinking, is she okay? Did she fall? Is she down on the ground? And so there's a life that you need to live still. And maybe you just retired and you finally get a chance to go travel with your spouse. You've got
Yeah.
your dad who just came
Yeah.
home to live with you because he's in this end stages. So it really does pull at us in every which way. I think it's beautiful, though, in some ways, because the fact that we still feel that pull, that we feel that responsibility, that even if our relationship with our parents isn't great, and even if there's a lot of hard memories there, we still, as humans, feel the need and the responsibility to
Yeah.
care for them, to care for the ones that cared for us. And I think that's
Yes.
a beautiful thing about us.
It is. It's a way to have that experience. And so I do want to dig more into that relationship aspect of it when it hasn't been a perfect relationship. But before we even go there, you alluded to this role reversal that happens. Like it's hard to think of your dad, maybe who has always been the strong one, who always was the guy who did this and that. And now he is not. And you're having to take care of him, maybe in some very physical ways. So there is that weird grieving, I think, that can happen too of who am I now? Am I the parent of them? And what do I do when they don't want to listen to me? When I'm saying, but mom, you need to take your meds. Like it's really important for you to take your medicines, but I don't want to take my just the strangeness of that
Yeah, and don't
is
tell me
gotta
what
be
to do. You're my daughter or you're my son. Yeah,
right.
I'm actually writing a new book right now that is about this idea of, especially for some mothers and daughters and some sons and fathers, the character in the book is almost hero worship for his
Mm.
dad. His dad was his hero. He could do
Yeah.
anything. He was so strong and he was so capable, and they would go fishing together, and he just idolized his dad. And now all of a sudden he goes to visit his dad, and he's weak and he's frail and he's unable to remember things, and he has to remind his dad to go to the bathroom and to pull up his pants. And it's such a shift for our psyches to have learned all our lives. We've never known a life without them being our parents, them being capable, them being strong, and we've learned to depend on that as a rudder in our lives that keeps us on track. I know so many people who say, I just call my mom and ask her a question, or I call my dad and I say, what should I do about this? All of a sudden, you can't do that. And
No.
they're
No.
actually depending on you. And my own dad, when he came to live with us in his last year of life, I remember he was being really angry a lot and being really short with me. And one day he said something really obnoxious, and I was hurt. And he said, you know what? I need to say I'm sorry, but I need you to understand, if I'm angry, it's because angry feels better than helpless. And most
Wow.
of the time, I feel helpless. Do you know what that's like for me? And I thought to myself, my dad, helpless? He's Superman. He's the most capable person I know. And for him to feel helpless, it's no wonder he was impatient and frustrated. And it was an adjustment for me to realize that he was helpless and we did need to do everything for him. And that is a big shift. That's another grieving.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's actually where I wanted to ask you about next. It's interesting that you talked about that because as you were sharing, I was thinking about my dad, who is in his 80s, but is still working. He's still working and doing things. But it was about 5 or 7 years ago. I remember this specific incident. My son at the time was on the tennis team. And so we had gone up to visit them and we thought, oh, how fun it would be to play doubles tennis. My dad and I grew up with my grandpa all playing tennis together. And I was like, this would be so fun. And so we did. We got out on the court. And I remember my dad was okay. But then there was this moment where he slipped and he fell.
Mhm.
And he was again, my dad again was the same thing. Hero. That's my dad. He's never going to do that. He slipped and he fell and he was so angry at himself. He was just so, almost, I think he was feeling embarrassment,
Sure.
frustration with his own body that
Mhm.
this was what was happening to him. And he had said that he said it in the moment, but he said it multiple times to me since then. Growing old ain't for sissies, Alicia. It's not for sissies. I'm telling you right now, just get ready for it. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
I hear you, dad. But that we have to, I'm sharing that to say, we have to have that understanding that this is what this loved one is going through too,
Yeah,
that they are experiencing
big time.
this. Your mind is may still be really sharp, but your
Mhm.
body is falling apart. And you're like, I don't want to have to be dependent on somebody. That's what an awful place to be when you've been a successful career person and you run for your family and all these things your whole life. And now this is where you're at. So there is a grieving that's happening for them that can build our own compassion for what they're
Definitely. And I think we need to keep that in mind of their perspective on things. So many times when I've worked in hospitals, we are, oh, that patient's grouchy or that patient's, mean. Well, get to what's underneath that. They're losing themselves, their own identity. I notice myself at 57, I just turned 57. I'm not as steady as I used to be. I'm not as strong as I used to be. I don't
right.
bounce back. I can't stay up late at night and be okay the next day. I used to work 12s all through the night and I was fine.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and magnify that even greater when you're getting older and now you've lost the ability to walk or to
Mm.
go to the bathroom when you want to and not when you don't want to. And then that's what also bothers me about so many times nurses, we are guilty of it, and also family members will belittle that person. Oh, come here, sweetie. Oh, honey, you can't do that. Let me help you. I had a nurse who said that the other day to one of my patients, and I pulled her aside. I said, do you realize that man was the CEO of a large, very successful tech company, and he's super intelligent, and you just called him sweetie and honey, and that was kind of demeaning. You need to reevaluate how you're speaking to him and to all your patients because that's really not respectful. And yeah, I think that there's that tendency for us to think, oh, they're helpless, they're like children. No, inside, just like I still feel like I'm 28 inside, they still feel
Yeah,
like they're younger inside too. And
sure.
we need to still treat them with that respect and understand the grieving that they're
Mm,
going through, that
mm,
they're going through a grieving of who they are. And
Right.
that is a serious thing that they have to deal with each day.
And thankfully, though, we have Christ in the middle of
Mhm.
this. If we know him and we're not sure, who knows what's going on maybe with a parent, and they may or may not know him. Ideally, they would. But in the midst of this, Christ is that glue, that buffer that's helping them process the mental concepts of having to grow old, and us process the new relationship we're in and the needing to sacrifice and all this stuff. And I think it calls into this other level of faith too, when we are dealing with a parent that we have not had a perfect relationship with. Maybe there's been some abuse. I have a friend who shared her story where her mom was terribly abusive, physically abusive in many, many ways, all of her growing up years, and never really apologized for it.
Right.
But her mom ended up having to live with them,
Mm.
and she said that was one of the hardest things, but also one of these great growth moments in her faith, was because she was like, I was cleaning up after my mom's stuff. And God was saying, yes, you need to do this. I understand what she did to you, but you still, like, this is serving at a whole nother level that your flesh does not want to do, is what she was describing. And I
Oh,
was like, yeah. So what do you say to people who are like, you don't understand what this person did to me and they never apologized? How do we walk through that?
it's a case by case basis because
Yeah.
everybody's different, but there are levels of dysfunction and hurt that can be overcome with grace. There are those times where she had to say, I have to give grace to my mom, just like God has given grace to me, and really realize our own need for grace and our own way that we've hurt him and we've done what's wrong, but he still gives us mercy and grace. And so giving that to our loved one can be an incredibly growing thing for our walk and our faith. And but at the same time, there are other cases where the abuse is maybe worse and it continues. They're continuing to be abusive verbally, maybe not physically because they can't, but I've had situations where I've had to say to a daughter or son, I need you to, for your sake and your family's sake, to pull you out of this situation. And I'm
Yeah.
to be a go-between for you. So you're still giving her great care, or you're still giving him
Yeah.
great care, but it's through other people.
Mm.
We have to figure out a way to protect you from this abuse because you've been with your mom or dad and they've slammed you emotionally for an hour, and then you go home, you don't have anything to give to your children and your husband and your family. And so we have put in place things so that they can just care for them from afar, and
Yes.
protect themselves.
Yes.
And that's okay. And give them
Right.
that permission and telling them just because your parent is now helpless and dying doesn't erase all of that. It doesn't
Yeah.
erase all of those feelings and those hurts. So we're not going to pretend that didn't happen and just say, oh, well, now they're the sad one, so I'll just forget about it. No, that's not how it works. But at the same time, you can do what you need to do as a person to take responsibility and to love them, but from a distance and with some protections in place so that you're not knocked down your emotional ladder every time you're with them. You don't have to put yourself in that place.
Have you ever snapped at the people you love or shut down when you actually wanted to connect with someone? If you've ever wondered, why did I react like that? First of all, you're not broken. Most of us were never taught how to understand what we're feeling in the moment. So when emotions spike, we react, not because we're bad at relationships, but because our emotions are running the show. Here is the simple truth. We cannot respond well to emotions that we don't understand yet. And so that's where I want to help you. I just created a brand new, totally free 7-day course called Notice and Name Your Feelings. And it's designed to teach you this exact emotional management skill. In just a few minutes a day, I'll walk you through this tool that I teach every single coaching client, how to recognize what you're actually feeling with compassion so that you can respond instead of react. And once you start understanding what's really happening inside of you, everything changes. How you show up with your spouse, how you talk to your coworkers, even the way you talk to yourself. The course includes short 5-minute videos, simple daily practices, and a supportive space with other women walking through it right alongside you. This is your first step out of reacting and into more calm, clarity, and peace in your relationships. So get started now in the free Notice and Name Your Feelings course at aliciamichelle.com/feelings, or just click the link in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you inside this free course. Again, it's aliciamichelle.com/feelings. I'm really glad you said that because that's important here. We're not talking about doing this without boundaries
Absolutely.
or that there won't be any pain that you might need to work through with God. And that might require you to say, this is the limit of what I can offer. And like you said, good care does not have to mean you being the person caring. Sometimes the better option is to be the person helping them find care that is someone else.
That's right.
So there's
100%.
lots of alternatives for
Yep.
this.
And they have a totally different relationship with that person. I noticed myself as a nurse, there were times with my dad where I would say, "Hey, Daddy, why don't you let me help you take a shower?" And he would say, "No, you're not going to do that. You're my daughter." And I'm like, "Dad, I'm a nurse. This is what I do. It's nothing to me." And he would say, "Yeah, I know you're a nurse, but right now you're my daughter. And
Yeah,
so that's
that
not
makes
going to
sense.
work." So you bring in someone else, and the patient can say ugly things to them, but they don't take it so much to heart because it's not their loved one. It's not their
Yes.
person.
It's not their dad
They
or their
don't
mom.
have the history. And so bring in those people, people like me who
Mhm.
come in and take care of some of those needs so that you can just be the daughter. You don't have
Yeah.
to be the nurse. You don't have to be the caregiver. You can be the daughter and have those moments that are good. And there are times when you have to say, you know what? I'm going to step away right now. What's
Mhm.
happening right now and the way you're speaking to me isn't okay with me. So I'm going to step away.
You make a good point though that like caring, there's the physical care that they may require or moving in with you or things like that. And there's this emotional caring that you can still be their daughter and they need that support from you in a different way that if you're doing all of it, you can't offer that,
It
you know?
changes. Yeah, it changes the dynamic of the relationship. And
Right.
you're harping on them to eat more protein and to drink enough water, and you're changing their briefs and you're helping them ambulate. And the relationship changes. It becomes sort of a caregiver to patient
Yeah.
dynamic instead of a daughter mother relationship or a spouse to spouse relationship.
Which they still need. Like that's still important. And so it's not just the care. And that kind of goes to this next question that I wanted to talk to you about was what do we do when maybe they are not at this point where they need full-time care, but they're at the edge where they're like they probably shouldn't be driving. They're making unsafe decisions with how they take care of their body or they're not choosing to eat. Just they're coping not well with their situation, but they're insisting on being independent. Like we can see that clearly they're not fine. What can we do in those sort of situations?
I think unpacking that is important. It's important to realize, number one, what our role is as their caregiver, as their loved one. And that is changing our mindset from, I'm here and my role is to fix this. I'm supposed to come in here
Yeah.
and I'm supposed to fix it. The problem with that is you can't fix it. You can't fix aging. You can't fix all the changes that come with aging. You can't fix decline and ultimately death. We're all going there. And so if you come into it with that mindset, then you'll be constantly failing. You constantly feel like a failure. They're not eating. Oh, I'm not doing something right. I have to get just the right recipes or just the right foods. And then maybe it's pressure and you're constantly not living up to what you think you should be doing. So when I have my workshops, I start out by training people to switch that mindset from fixer to helper. If you're going into this as saying, "Hey, I'm not here to fix anything. There's no fixing this. This is normal life. This is what happens at end of life. I'm here to be a helper. I can
Mm.
serve up to them all the options and I can give them all of the great tools that they can use, and they get to choose to take them or leave them." So, one of the hardest things for caregivers to accept is that people, unless they're hurting someone else, people have
Mm.
a right to make bad decisions. These aren't our children where we're responsible for them. These are adults. If they're not hurting anyone and they want to have a beer every day, and we know that's not the best thing for them, they have a right to do that. And we need to give them that respect to let them do that. If they like to eat certain foods that aren't that healthy and they're not hurting anybody else, they have a right to do that. And we can tell them, hey, this is why we don't think that's a great choice. But ultimately, it is their choice. And so giving them the respect of saying to yourself again and again, people have a right to choose. They have a right to make their own decisions, even if we think they're bad ones, is really helpful to change your brain around that. And then you come at it differently. And they can sense that. I've noticed it again and again. When kids come at their mom and dad and say, you need to get caregivers in there. You need to bring in somebody to help you. And they say, no way, I'm not doing that. I don't need that. I don't want a stranger in my house. I'm fine.
Yeah.
And you're like, haven't you fallen 8 times in the last week? Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm fine. And then I'll come in as a nurse and I'll say, I totally get it. I would feel the same way. Agree with them. I wouldn't want to have a stranger in my house. I understand that. That makes perfect
Mm.
sense. But here's some ideas for you. The place you really don't want to be is the hospital and the rehab facilities, right? You don't want to go there. You want to stay home as long as you can. This is your ticket to doing that. Bringing in help is going to get you what you want, and that is staying home and agreeing with them, not pushing against them, just saying to them, and here are the options. You can bring in a caregiver who you can get to know maybe once a week and just get to know them, slow burn. And then once you get to know them, and I guarantee you within a couple weeks they'll be best friends unless it's not a fit, and then we'll find someone else. They always become friends in the end when they find the right person. And then we'll move into it slowly. The other option is you can move somewhere else where you don't want to be. But maybe they might just say, I don't want any of this, and really dig in their heels and say, no, I'm staying home. I'm not getting any care. And then
Mm.
you kind of have to turn your mind to, okay, I need to be ready then when the emergency
Right.
happens, because there
Right.
probably will be a fall. There
Yeah.
probably will be an infection.
Mm.
There probably will be something as a consequence. So put things in place so that you're ready when that does happen. Keep an
Yeah.
emergency card in your purse that has their address, the hospital they want to be taken to,
Mm.
the numbers for emergencies, all those, their social security number, date of birth, insurance, so that you're ready when you get that call that they've fallen, you can call and get help. Put some safety nets in place, but ultimately you have to sit back and say, you have a right to choose that. This is your
Yes.
life. And even though I've presented you other options and I've told you what my opinion is, it's still your right to make what I think is a bad decision. And I
Mm.
will be here to pick up the pieces when
Wow.
something happens.
I think that's really wise advice because pushing them into something that they don't want to do is not helping, but you're giving them the ability to choose and they get to live with that choice. And you're also allowing yourself to be released to the responsibility
Yeah.
because you've said, I allowed you to have that choice. And this is what happened because you didn't make that choice.
Yeah.
So I think it's a win win for everyone
Yeah.
around to have that perspective.
And then you can put in safety measures for sure. I routinely disconnect people's stoves and ovens. We turn down the water heater so that they can't turn it up super high and scald themselves.
Yeah.
We put medications in a locked box, so that has to be managed by someone else. We put safety bars everywhere. We have somebody checking in on the regular. We do everything we can to mitigate for
Right.
their choices. At the end of the day, it's important for us to realize that they have a right.
Well, another question, which I ran into with someone that I was talking to before we did this interview, just on her thoughts on what would you ask someone like you about this sort of situation. And she was saying it's really hard for her to feel like she's can even get away. She's afraid to take a weekend away. She's afraid to make space for herself because she's terrified something's going to go wrong. Like, how do I even get the rest that I know I need?
Yeah.
But what do I do with that when I feel like, oh my gosh, but I can't leave my mom for a day? Like, I can't even go anywhere. So, how do you
And
do?
how exhausting that is,
Yeah.
and how it will burn you out. You will burn out. And we see so many
Right.
times the caregiver is the one who gets sick or
Mm.
injured, or some harm comes to them because they're just overdone. So
Yeah.
I always teach in my workshops again that we don't do this alone. And if you try to do it alone, it's a recipe for burnout. So I try to help people create a care team. I want people to
Mm.
see this as a team sport and put people in place so that you are not the sole provider
Right.
of everything. So if you have siblings, wonderful. Divide up tasks. One person is in charge of medical appointments, taking mom or dad to the doctor and taking notes and communicating with everybody on the team about what was said. One person's in charge of getting the medications, having them ordered from the pharmacy or picking them up. Somebody's in charge of the groceries, either ordering them online or going and getting them. Divide up those tasks, the legal stuff, their hygiene, that kind of a thing. And beyond family, and by the way, not just siblings, grandchildren are great with this.
Mm.
Out a calendar and look at the week and say, okay, who can come on Tuesdays in the
Mhm.
afternoons and sit with grandpa and watch his favorite Gunsmoke show and just be with him, bring him some water if he's thirsty or whatever he needs, stay with him when he goes to the bathroom while I can get away and go to
Yeah.
the gym or go take a walk or go to lunch with a friend. Putting those people in place. I mean, one time a week for a grandchild, they should be able to do that. Got enough people, friends, neighbors, church. There are a lot of people you can put on the team like that. And then beyond that, getting paid help. Now, people are going to say it's expensive, and I get that. It is true. When you pay out of pocket for home care, it's expensive. For some people, that's not a concern, but for others that it is, we look at things like, are they a veteran or was their spouse a veteran? There are incredible benefits where you can get top-notch care for free.
Wow. Yeah.
And there are other programs that are fantastic. PACE is one of my favorite programs for lower income people, but they'll just take Medicare as well. And almost everybody has Medicare. And they provide caregivers for free and a lot of other really good benefits. I love PACE. We have one right here in San Marcos and it's nationwide. And then you can also look at the county and see if the county has resources depending on your income and your assets. You can get county help, IHSS, in our case, in our San Diego County. And then you can also look at creative ways. Some people have long-term care insurance policies. A lot
Oh,
of
okay.
kids don't realize that their parents have those, especially if they were state workers, like teachers and people who worked for the state. They
Right.
often have CalPERS or different programs that are long-term care insurance, and that will pay for care. And then sometimes people get creative. I had a client who was in her 90s when she passed away just this year, and she had care for 6 years, 24/7.
Wow.
And she paid for it by reverse mortgaging her house. Now, when people hear reverse mortgage, they're like, oh, no, that's a bad idea. And it can be a bad idea. People can take advantage of it and advantage of people. But in her case, she didn't have any kids that she needed to give that house to or leave it to. It was a smart idea for her because she
Mm.
was living in the where she wanted to be at home,
Yeah.
24/7 care, and it paid for all of that care up until the
Wow.
point where we put her on hospice and she was able to die peacefully at home. So
Wow.
there are some creative ways to go about getting paid care, but once you get used to it and you trust that person, you have Martha who comes every Tuesday and Thursday for the afternoon, you know you can go and get some replenishment. Oh, and daycare programs are fantastic too,
Oh.
especially if your loved one has dementia. There are
Mhm.
places like AmeriCare and Glenner Center and a lot of places around that do daycare, and they come and pick your loved one up in a handicap van or a
Yeah.
bus and take them to the place and they do things. Senior centers even have some things. So there are lots of things you can do to
Right.
give them some activity outside of you and just sitting around
Sure.
watching TV, and at the same time give you a break. But to put those things in place for your friend, I would tell her, please go take the trip. Just
Yeah.
put things in place so that somebody else is watching her and you can feel completely relaxed and not have to worry about it all the time. She needs
That's
that.
great. Yeah, she does, especially if it's a long-term thing. We have to think about this as a marathon. This is not a 1 week or even 1 month or 2 months thing. Typically, this is a slow process of
Yep.
someone aging and going through this.
And it's like the airline thing, right? If you help if the
Yeah.
oxygen comes down, you help yourself
Yeah.
first and then your child. In this case,
Right.
if you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to burn out and not be there for your parent or your
Right.
loved one because you're completely.
Not helpful at that point. And that is where I want to end up here with this conversation about we can feel guilty. I don't know if guilty is the right word, but just unsettled in our spirit if we're a follower of Christ and we're doing this work and it just doesn't feel very holy. Like I'm not being very graceful. Like I don't know. I just feel ashamed. I feel alone by all of this. I should think of this in this really altruistic way. I'm able to help my mom through this and it's really great. But honestly, it's a drain and I'm tired. And what would you say to that person who's like, honestly, this is where I'm at and it's exhausting and I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I talk to that person every day.
Mm.
It's very often a daughter or a spouse, or today I spoke with a girlfriend of a man who's in his final stages, and she's just like, I'm done with him. He's so frustrating and he's in pain. So he's just yelling at me and he's grouchy, and I don't want to do this anymore. I think it's so important for them, for us all in this discussion, to be real about that.
Yeah.
I say
Yeah.
in my book that there were moments with my dad where I loved him so much and felt so tender towards him, but there were moments where I felt like I hated him
Mm,
and I just wanted him out of my house. Your parents know uniquely how to pull your chain. They know what triggers and
they do.
they're so good at it. I remember one time he said, "Could I have some ice cream?" I said, "Sure." And I went and got it and brought it back to him. And he said, "I don't know what you're giving me." And I said, "I'm giving you your regular 2 scoops of ice cream." And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "2 scoops. This is 3 scoops." I said, "What was the end of the thing? It was the end of the can. So I just gave you what was left." He goes, "Do I need to explain to you what two means? Are you having trouble with the concept of two? What is it going to take for you to understand this?" And that's one of those where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to
Oh,
step away right now. I'm
let
going to
that
step
go.
away. If you don't want it, don't eat it. I'll take
Yeah.
it. And then you feel guilty for snapping if you do. Sometimes I didn't walk away. Sometimes I said,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm doing everything here and you're
Yeah.
not grateful." And then you feel terrible. You feel like, what a bad daughter I am. So
Mm,
I think it's important that we acknowledge those feelings and say,
yeah.
it's okay. I write about in the book a situation where the main character's husband, who has dementia, they're in a restaurant. The waitress comes up with kind of a tight blouse on, and the person with dementia looks at her and goes, "Wow, nice rack." Because people with dementia have no filter
They just say whatever.
and they
Yeah.
say inappropriate things all the time. And it's so embarrassing. And the wife was so humiliated and snapping at him and telling him, "What are you doing? And this is so wrong." And he was like, "What?" She
Mhm.
does. Just having her in the scene be able to unpack that and to admit he's not who he was. He's not who
Yeah.
I married. This is not my dad that I knew, or my spouse that I knew, or my mom, but this is their disease. This is their brain's deterioration. I always say to loved ones of dementia patients, imagine if we said everything that was on our mind all the time. That would be bad. And so that's what they're doing. They've lost their filter. And so they say whatever's on their mind. So understanding that, but normalizing this feeling of this is hard and this is not lovely and this is not, there are glimpses and there will be glimpses. I talk in the book too about in the desert, there are flowers where flowers
Mm,
have no business
mhm.
being, where you think, how could
Right.
he possibly be growing here? But you'll find in the desert of caregiving that there are moments, there are glimmers, there are times when they say thank you, or they say, "I love you," or my dad, it was the kiss goodnight every night. He wanted a kiss goodnight. And he would call me precious, just little things that you look back on and are sweet. But sometimes those are far and few between. And more often you get the criticism and the harshness. And I think it's important too to recognize that you deserve extra grace during this time. And it's
Mm,
not going to be forever. It's not
yeah.
going to be forever. It's a short season. Give yourself extra grace in this time that it's not going to feel good. You're not going to feel your best. A lot of people have brain fog. They can't clean up. They can't do projects that they used to be able to do. They're not keeping up with the house. It's okay. Give yourself
Mm,
that grace right now. This is not a time to be on top of it with everything. This is a time of extra grace required, and it will pass. And you want to look back at it at this time and say, I did right by them. It wasn't perfect. It was messy at times, but I did my darndest. I did my best to give them what they need and to love them.
mm. I'm so grateful that you have a resource for people to be able to take some of these principles and know that they're not walking alone through all of this. So tell us a little bit more about your new book.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Yeah, this book just got published and it's on Amazon. It's called Walk Me Home, the companion for the caregiving journey, because it's kind of two books in one. The first half is a story A lot of these topics are kind of boring when you just list out, oh, here's some tips on how to move someone in bed. So I made a story based on all of the hundreds of patients and their families I've cared for that people can see themselves in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
many emails from people who are in the trenches right now, and they say, oh, I cried my way through chapter 10 because that was me. That is me. I am living that right now.
Yeah.
So it helps you just feel seen and understood. Some of the things that they go through, you will recognize and you will say, I'm in that. And then there's a nurse in the story who offers wisdom throughout as sort of a guide. And then the second half of the book, corresponding with each chapter from the story, there's a chapter that gives you tools and guides and talking points and strategies,
Right.
resources that can help you that are practical. So if your loved one just broke their hip and they're coming out of the hospital and they're moving in with you tomorrow, you don't want to read a story. It's not time for that. You want to go to straight to the chapter on how to transition from hospital to home. What
Yeah.
safety things do I need to put into place? That kind of stuff. That's all in the back of the book. It's the story at the beginning. It's a quick read. It's not a long. I didn't make it long because I know people are overwhelmed. But the last half is all those resources and it's all things I've learned from all of these patients that I've taken care of over the years. I've been a nurse for more years than I should probably share. So many stories. And I say right at the beginning, this is for my patients. You've taught me everything. And I say, we are going to have quite a reunion someday when we're together again, safe at home
Oh,
because I was a hospice nurse before my current work with home health and home care. And I'm going to know a lot of people there. And another thing we talk about faith a lot in the book. It's sort of a ribbon that is through the whole thing. God's in the middle of this. He's in the middle of the unraveling. He's in the middle of the mess and the smell, and he's right there in it. And I think it's so important to keep that in mind. I often say when I speak that Christians die differently. They
mm,
really do. I've sat at so many bedsides as a hospice nurse as people are taking their last breath, and Christians die differently. There's a different peace there, there's a different calm, there's a different knowing of where they're going and what this life is really all about and what it's not all about, that this is
yeah.
not the end. And
Right.
so it talks about that as well. And not that it's not hard, but it's not death that's hard, it's suffering that's hard.
It's the suffering.
It's
Yeah.
suffering. Yeah.
Okay. So the book is called Walk Me Home by you, Linda Larson. And is there a website or somewhere that people can, if they want to reach out to you for maybe coaching or help, what would that be?
I do one-on-one coaching, consulting. Some people want a phone call every week so we can talk through some issues and we go through everything. We go through the meds and having been an RN for so long, we go through the medical stuff as well as the emotional stuff and the faith stuff and we pray together and all that. Other people just want a consultation. Maybe they're at a decision point. They're thinking, should I bring my mom out to Denver to live with my sister? Well, let's talk it through. We can talk about the pros and cons of that and some
Yeah.
of the details of how that could work. So some
Okay.
people just need that consultation. So I just have people get a hold of me via my email,
Okay.
which is linda.preparedtocare@gmail.com. And
Okay.
it's on the back of the book. It talks about it right here.
Really?
So yeah, so you can get a hold of me that way and then set up on Calendly and we can get that done. So it's nice to
Perfect.
have somebody who not only has done this professionally for so many years, but also who's done this personally.
Yeah.
That was why I felt like God was saying, you need to write a book because this is unique in that you have the
Yeah.
education and the experience plus the personal experience of going through it. Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much for all that you shared today. This was really, really powerful. I know an encouragement to a lot of people. So thank you, Linda.
my pleasure.
I'm so grateful for that conversation with Linda because, like we said, throughout the conversation, I feel like there was a lot of great nuggets and takeaways. And there's not a lot of voices around this. It's this season that has come about, especially as we as a society are living longer and we are able to have more care options to extend our life. So we need to come to the reality that a lot of us are going to be helping people in these end of life stages, maybe longer. It's just a tricky stage because we don't know what to do with it. We've never walked through something like this before. And there's all this charge of emotion because it's family and maybe past history is involved in it. And maybe there's the sibling rivalry of, well, I'm the one doing all of it and he's not doing anything. And so I pray that if you're in this situation, you will take this episode and write down what were some takeaways for you that really you needed to hear, that God had for you. Get a copy of Linda's book. It's called Walk Me Home. It's by Linda Larson. You're going to find it on Amazon. Great little book. I love that she has the side of she's telling the story so that you can relate to it, and she has the practical stuff. So it's a great combination of both. I want to encourage you that you are not alone in this if you're struggling here. Your emotions are valid. What you're feeling is valid, and you're not a bad daughter for feeling overwhelmed. If there is something that we can do to encourage you or to pray for you through this, I would love to offer that to you. You can reach out to me anytime on Instagram. It's at Alicia Michelle Coach. And if you want to work through some of the emotions behind it yourself and you want to reach out to me to ask a question about this, you can always go to the website and go to aliciamichelle.com/chat and ask that one question around the emotions and maybe relating to a specific emotion to this. And if that's helpful for you, I'm glad to serve you in that way as well. All right, friend, take great care. Again, share this with someone if you aren't in this situation, someone who might need to hear this. I pray that you will pass this episode on. This is one of those that I feel like a lot of people need to hear and be encouraged by. Take care, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for joining me today. For full show notes and helpful next step resources, visit aliciamichelle.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, I'd be honored if you'd leave a 5-star rating and review. Thanks for being here. I'll see you back next week.